Hey guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. We've got something a bit slightly different today. As you can see, we're on video. I'm joined by Toni from Responsible Reptile Keeping. Here we are at C&T Exotics in Chipperfield, just outside of Hemel Hempstead. So if you are in the area or you do want to come look at some of the local shops, come have a little check out. And they've been really good, providing us a fantastic backdrop and sort of facility to record this in today. So big thanks to those, and big thanks to you, Toni, for coming on.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me. It's a nice place we're in, isn't it?
Lovely. A fantastic setup in here, and a little bit different to the norm that I'm normally doing.
Yeah, some different species, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, some really nice bits out there, actually.
Thanks, guys.
So this podcast is it's been one that's been talked about, muted about for a fair few months now, and finally found the time to sit down together between all your traveling around the world and promoting sort of reptile interest, etc. So, why don't we just go and start with a little bit of a brief introduction of your involvement with reptiles and why you are in the industry and the hobby that you're in, for example.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a little bit how far back do you want to go and how much time have you got? But in a nutshell, I've been working with reptiles for nearly 40 years. I think it's 38 or something like that, if you want to be accurate. I started when I was a teenager at a place in Warsaw called the Serpentarium, which, if you're old, you might remember. It used to be the biggest reptile house in Europe, and I worked for a guy called Dave Lester. And that place gave me access to not only loads of interesting species to work with, but also to pretty much everybody who was anybody in the world of reptiles in the 80s and 90s in the UK, a lot of Europe, and a lot of the Americans as well. So that was really my in. So I worked there for a good few years until Dave died. And then after that, I essentially became a professional sidekick in the world of reptiles, because I knew all the key players. I ended up working with a lot of those guys, working on their projects. But in the meantime, what also happened was that people who were running reptile magazines was like, "Hey, Toni, you've worked with some really cool stuff. Can you write us some articles?" So I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll write you an article about this, that, and the other," and wrote a few magazine articles. And from that, I eventually developed a career as a journalist alongside my reptile work, writing for pet trade magazines, for hobbies magazines, etc., etc. And again, as part of that work, I became involved with the reptile advocacy movement. You get to learn about what's happening in the news and all the attacks that the animal rights fraternity hit us with. And so that became something I was very involved with. And I worked quite closely with Chris Newman at REPTA, the Reptile and Exotic Pet Trade Association, and essentially bolted my communications, journalism, writing expertise onto the side of REPTA. Or at least to the extent that I was able to, as a volunteering my expertise and help. Pretty much got to learn about everything that was happening that could be a detriment to the reptile trade. It was my job essentially to keep an eye on what the animal rights fraternity campaigners were up to. And that's pretty much leads us to where we are today. But I mean, in terms of my credentials, it's probably a boring list. I've worked in retail, worked in wholesale, did a bit of venomous, did a bit of live food breeding, journalism, advocacy.
Just a few little bits then.
Been around, like I say, professional sidekick, jack of all trades. But in the last couple of years, we've focused more specifically on the communications and PR side of reptiles and responsible reptile keeping, because we realized that was a side of things that hadn't really been done very well, and to our detriment, we needed to get on top of that, because animal rights campaigners do that thing really, really well. They do PR, marketing, social media really well, and we just don't. We don't have control of the narrative.
Do you think that's a problem sort of internationally, or more so within the UK itself?
Absolutely internationally. The reptile advocacy organisations around the world have done a fantastic job, and without them, we'd be in a lot of trouble. They concentrate their efforts and their expertise, which is lobbying and advisory groups to governments and legislators. So essentially, problematic legislation will occur or be proposed, and organisations such as REPTA or USARC in America or DGHT and BNF in Germany, there's a few around the world. What these guys do is they put their pants on the outside and put a cape on, and they go and superhero along and fix that problem. And that's been a very, very effective way of doing things for 20 or so years. And these guys do a fabulous job with the kind of budgets that they have and the funding that they have. If you compare their budgets and funding with the budgets and funding that the animal rights organisations have, Born Free, World Wildlife Fund, RSPCA, World Animal Protection, there's hundreds of them. The millions upon millions of pounds that those organisations have to attack us with, we do those guys, the advocacy guys, do an amazingly good job considering their budget. They punch well above their weight. But things have been changing in the last 10 years or so. Things have changed significantly in the last 10 years or so. It's no longer enough for us to go to legislators and civil servants and say, hey, the animal rights people say this and we know that it's crap. And then previously the legislators would say, well, how do you know it's crap? And somebody could say, well, I've been doing it for 35 years. I know what I'm talking about. You should listen to me. That kind of thing hasn't been so effective. Governments work with research and statistics and data. So those advocacy organisations, again, have done the great work of building statistics and data and statistics and data and research to support our positions, to support our story. But in the last 10 years, even being scientifically sound, even facts and research and science sometimes haven't been enough to do the job, and that's where we come in.
I'm guessing the research, the data, etc., being not enough scientifically. That sort of ties in with the ban of ball pythons in Spain, things like that, where they were considered an invasive species and such.
Goodness. How long have you got for that story? Well, that's a really good example of what I'm talking about. And this was one of the things that prompted us to launch Responsible Reptile Keeping. Being right isn't always enough nowadays. And we come back to the problems caused by the internet. In the last 10 or so years, the way people absorb information and the way people form opinions and the way people develop ideologies and, the news that they ingest, that nowadays is coming from the internet. It's coming from social media. It's coming from their web feeds. It's coming from their email inboxes.
Yeah.
And the animal rights groups have been very, very good at distributing propaganda and misinformation to make us look bad. So let's go back to the Spanish situation, because that's a very good example of how that kind of information bias helped to form unsuitable legislation in Spain. So back in, and I'm trying to remember my dates here, I'm very sorry if I get it wrong by a year or two, but back in about 2016-17, somebody in Spain decided to do a risk assessment study to determine whether or not ball pythons, royal pythons could become invasive in Spain. Now, we all know as keepers that the West African habitat of these animals is nothing like the environment you find in Mediterranean Spain. But for whatever crazy reason, this study, the person who ran the study, and we still don't know who it is, by the way, the person who ran the study decided that ball pythons could indeed become invasive in Spain. And they submitted this study, this risk assessment report to the government working group. And everybody who knew what they were talking about in the government working group laughed at it because it was clearly ridiculous. And that study got put away in a bottom drawer and forgotten about for several years. Then, in around 2019, the Spanish government changed, and I think he was described by my contact in Spain as an eco-activist. So
okay.
I don't know how that translates very well, but my contact in Spain is from the Valencian Herpetological Society. He has the most Spanish name I've ever heard in my life. It's Jose Lopez Maria Sanchez, and he's awesome. And he filled me in on this whole story. So the Valencian So the civil servant who came to power, who was an eco-activist, found this report, decided it was fabulous, and decided to use it to ban ball pythons in Spain. And that happened more or less overnight.
Yeah.
So overnight, with this ridiculous report, ball pythons were banned in Spain. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that happening in the UK or in America? Well, it was just as devastating in Spain. Ball pythons are as popular in Spain as they are.
Yeah.
Anyway, with this ban in place, the Valencian Herpetological Society, Jose and his cohorts decided to take that law to court, decided to take that piece of legislation to court. And they raised a chunk of money, I think about 15,000 euros, took it to court. And they had such a strong case. It was very easy to refute this risk assessment, this invasive species risk assessment. Even the most basic science could prove that it was ridiculous. So they essentially gave this risk assessment a real spanking in court. And everybody was confident that the ban would be overturned. But at the end of the case, the judge says, well, I hear what you say and I understand the science behind it, but we're going to keep the ban anyway, just as a precaution. And everybody who was involved in that case believed that the pressure from the animal rights groups, the amount of noise that they'd made and the amount of support that they'd managed to harvest was a significant factor in that court case. And so it wasn't enough to be accurate. It wasn't enough to be factually correct and scientifically correct and have facts on your side. The ideology and the philosophy of animal rights propaganda and the amount of noise that they made had won through. And this has been true in several other cases. You remember the Doncaster show was banned recently because ideological pressure on the local authority, on the council, meant that somebody in power there was able to assert influence, and the venue was no longer available to us because of that. It wasn't enough that we had vets on site. It wasn't enough that those shows had run to high welfare standards. It wasn't enough that we'd had, I think, probably 10 or so years without any significant incidents of a problem. Just one person's opinion was able to change the whole course of how that fabulous show was run. And now we don't have Doncaster anymore. So it's not enough nowadays to be right, to be factually accurate, to be scientifically credible. It's a battle of ideology, it's a battle of philosophy, it's a battle of where you want to plant your flag along a spectrum between animal welfare, which is interested in the care of the animal, and animal rights, which is a principle of philosophy where they just want to stop humans from interacting with animals. And the flag is moving more and more towards the animal rights end. And I believe that's because animal rights campaigners have control of the narrative and they have enough power and enough influence, and we simply don't.
There's enough funds.
And enough funds, yeah.
Money talks, doesn't it? Unfortunately, it's the same for almost all aspects of life, but that is, like you say, you go back to how they do social media work, etc. You've only got to see that the amount of border-free adverts that you see on Facebook and the wild animal protection, surveys that you can click on Facebook and stuff. That all costs money, and that all comes at a big cost for them. But that's how they're pushing their narrative and their story.
Well, this is something that we've been focusing on for a while, is that I'm confident that animal rights organisations like that recruit support from people who believe that they're supporting good animal welfare. And if those people who support these organisations realise that the end game for these organisations is to stop all animal interaction, all animal keeping, all animal utilisation for any purpose, whether it be a guide dog or fishing, farming, pet keeping, whatever, the aim is to close it all down. I think it was Peter, the people for the ethical treatment of animals, who had a slogan, "Better dead than bred," which drops my jaw. And recently the Born Free campaign against people keeping animals on the dangerous wild animals list, excuse me, even though the Dangerous Wild Animals Act has been one of the most successful pieces of legislation in British history, there have been 0 incidents of people being harmed by somebody with an animal that's licensed through the Dangerous Wild Animals Act. Even though, to keep, let's use primates as an example now, you have to keep primates to the same standards as a zoo would. So extremely high welfare standards. Born Free aren't happy with that level of welfare. They're not happy with the highest level of welfare that is attainable. They still want people to not be able to keep them. And that's their ultimate end goal. And people who support these organisations should realise that. I think that if we're able to communicate our side of the argument to the general public, they'll realise who has animal welfare at heart. They'll realise where all the expertise and science and innovation in animal husbandry is coming from. And in reptiles specifically, it's coming from private keepers all the time. So I believe that if we're able to communicate our side of the story effectively, we can start recruiting support for good welfare. We can start to win that battle for hearts and minds. So that's kind of where we're aiming.
Well, that's just a good example, or 2 good examples of the troubles that we're facing within the industry or the hobby, etc., whatever you want to call it today. So let's roll back a little bit to responsible reptile keeping. Where does that get set up? Where does that fit into where we are now?
Well, we tried for a long time to bolt our expertise, our communications expertise, onto the side of the advocacy organisations. And to be quite honest, we failed. And the reason we failed was because while we were volunteering and working with the advocacy organisations, we weren't earning a living. And then when we switched over to spend time paying the bills, we couldn't work for the advocacy organisations. So that method of attempting to achieve the communications result we wanted didn't work. And we tried our best at that for almost a decade. And I always had this idea in the back of my mind that somebody should do something about this communications problem that we had. And indeed, every time this misinformation pops up on the internet, every time there's a TV program about how bad reptile shows are, every time there's a Facebook post that's full of misinformation, the reptile community's up in arms. Somebody should do something. Yeah. So let's look at that for a second. I agree. Somebody should do something. So who should do something? Well, maybe the people with the most to lose should do something. Maybe the big reptile companies should do something. Okay. So which one of those reptile companies should do something? Should it be ZoomEd? Should it be Exoterra? Should it be Arcadia? Which one of those should pick up the tab, should spend all the time and effort? And why haven't they already? Well, the reason is because they're busy running businesses. Yeah. And do they have the time, the money, or the expertise to do these things? And which one of them should do it? So that's that. So maybe the advocacy organisation should pick up this PR, marketing, media problem. Well, maybe they should. But they're busy doing what they do best, which is lobbying and politics and advocacy. That's what they do best. And they simply don't have the funding to do this pretty big job of communication. We know that keepers would do the job. We know that if they had the resources, if they had the videos to hand, if they had the content to hand to fight this battle for us and with us, then they would do so. But they just don't have the videos. Who spends, the most you're going to do is put a reply on the end of a thread.
Yeah.
And you need something a bit more heavyweight than that. So I'd spoken for a long time that something should be done and sort of discuss what it might look like with my wife. And eventually, my wife, Vicky, God bless her, said to me, look, you've been talking about doing something for a very long time. Either do something or shut the hell up. Yeah. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's a fair point. So I'd been developing this idea in my mind. And just before COVID, I went to the ham show, the ham reptile show, big reptile show. And I was sat next to Emmanuel from Exoterra, and I said, we had a beer. And I said, hey, Emmanuel, I've got this idea, and I think it's a good idea, but let me hit you with it. So I gave him this really rough outline of what responsible reptile keeping would look like. And he said, that sounds exactly what we need. That sounds fantastic. Come to me with a credible proposal and I will help you fund it. Yeah. So then COVID happened, and it took me a couple of years to get a rough proposal together. And I went over to Belgium to see Emmanuel.
Yep.
And he said, "This is fabulous." And Exoterra were one of our first funders.
Okay.
From there, we got some other big brands on board. Included in those would be Arcadia, the Montreal brands, and also Zoomed came on board as well. And
so some pretty big hitters within the reptile industry, yeah.
And that was really encouraging for us because we had this idea of what we could do and should do. And it wasn't until we put it in front of some of those big brands we realised that it was a necessary and important project for those big brands to come up with funding for what we do. Gave us the reassurance that we were on the right track. So I had a conversation with my wife about it, and my wife's an important aspect of this organisation. I know about reptiles, know a little bit about politics, and I know a reasonable amount about communication. She does all the graphic design, all the pretty stuff, and all of the memberships, all of the customer service, all of the administration, all of the
stuff that gets you noticed.
Well, she keeps the wheels on, you know. So she does all the work behind the scenes that keep the wheels on, basically. And I said to her that we needed to spend a year making a splash, making sure that people knew who we are, knew what we were doing, saw our content out there, establishing the fact that we were competent and proficient and dedicated and passionate about this thing. So we spent a year essentially volunteering for free, doing the work for free, putting all of the funding into creating content and making sure that our voices were heard. And I said to her, give me a year to make this thing work. And if after a year it doesn't work, we'll call it a day. But a year's gone now, and we've made, I think, a reasonable splash.
Yeah.
I think we've presented the case for what we're doing, and all the organisations and companies that we're working with. Excuse me again. I've been talking for the last week, so I'm sorry for my rough voice.
That pretend that it wasn't a jolly up going around the States.
I wish we had. I'll tell you about that shortly. But that was a really good, again, a good trip. We was testing the water in the States for what we do, and the reception again was very good. And this is encouraging to us. The organisations and companies that we've got on board to fund us have proved that the job we're doing is urgent. They understand the assignment. And our job really is to support the advocacy organisations that are already doing the lobbying work. The US ARCs, the DGHT, the Raptors, etc. I'm on the board of Raptor, and I'm in touch with Phil Goss at US ARC a lot, and we're meeting with the German contingent when we go up to Hammer next month, and we're already in touch with those guys. I did a podcast with DGHT recently. And the way we work is that those guys know what's happening on the front line legislatively.
Yeah.
They know where the current focus is, what debates are being had at legislative level, and they tell us which way, they let us know which direction to aim our content so that it's timely and relevant. And that's how we work together with those organisations. We're essentially a dedicated media department for the international reptile community. We make sure we tell our side of the story. We make sure that we fight for responsible keepers. We make sure that our message gets across, and so that it's not just the animal rights people that are influencing legislation and influencing people on the internet and recruiting hearts and minds. We're doing that now. That's our job. And we do it on behalf of the advocacy organisations that have been firefighting these problems for decades.
JVK Reptiles and Racks is proud sponsor of That Woolfie's Royal podcast show. Here at JVK we sell professional stainless steel hand-welded racks for ball pythons, leopard geckos, burms, boas and retics. We have recently introduced acrylic displays and are soon to come out with our own green tree python enclosures. We are also breeders of high-end designer morphs concentrating on recessive and codom genes such as clown, desert ghost, tornado, sunset and tri-stripe, and many other codoms to suit. If you'd like to get hold of us, we have a website, jvkreptilesandracks.co.uk. We are on most social media platforms such as Instagram and Facebook, and we also have a page on Morph Market.
Hi there, this is Scott from Scott Wilkinson Reptiles. I'm pleased to support that Woolfie Royals podcast. It's absolutely fantastic to have a UK-based podcast, and Tom's slowly starting to get the hang of this. So, for those that don't know me, I've been breeding reptiles now for over 35 years and have focused on breeding ball python morphs for the last 20 years. I'm also working with probably the largest collection of Australian blue-tongue skinks in Europe, including albinos and melanistics. I also have been importing and exporting reptiles for over 25 years now and currently offer that service for other breeders and collectors and can ship your animals in and out of Europe, USA and Canada. Best place to find me is on Instagram or YouTube, or if you're really unlucky, you'll see me half naked at a reptile show somewhere around the world. Message me via Instagram for any further details and enjoy this amazing podcast. Take care.
So, for anyone that's sort of listening and watching, so you mentioned early advocacy there. The main differences between yourselves and those advocacy groups like the USARCs, the DGHTs and stuff, they're the guys that are in Parliament or they're the guys that are lobbying, etc. And you're the wheels of progression, basically, to get that message across to the public.
There's a public relations branch necessity to what we do. There's a lot of work being done behind the scenes by the advocacy organisations, but that's largely not public facing. People might not appreciate how much work goes on behind the scenes that's executed by those organisations, the advocacy organisations. Our job is to bring it to the forefront so that the people who need to know this information have the information to work with. And I realise that the vast majority of reptile keepers just want to keep their one little epic kind of tank and don't want to indulge in the deep and meaningful political conversations that we need to have. But those that do want to get involved, those that do need that information, we're there to make sure that they're informed and make sure that stakeholders are accurately informed. It was Phil Goss at USR that says, whoever shows up makes the laws.
Yeah.
And we've been showing up, I say we, reptile people, reptile advocates have been showing up for decades, helping to inform governments. But where we haven't been showing up is online, and we haven't been showing up in communications. And that's where we come in, making sure that the truth about reptile keeping comes out. Let me give you one example. So there's been a statistic out there doing the rounds for at least a decade and probably more, that 75% of pet reptiles die in the first year. Have you seen that stat?
Yeah, by yours truly.
Yeah, you're a good friend of mine. So everybody who works with reptiles heard that statistic and went, hey, 75%, that can't be true. And we kind of knew instinctively that it was complete crap. So a few people looked into that statistic and trying to find out how it come about. And I can give you a brief summary of how that came about. So the first thing that happened was the people who came up with that statistic used numbers from a survey to determine how many animals were alive and well in the UK. And the survey they used was from what used to be called the Pet Food Manufacturers Association, but it's now Pet Food UK. And PFMA would do a random survey of homes, and they'd call you up and they'd say, do you keep dogs? Do you keep cats? Do you keep fish? Do you keep gerbils? Do you keep reptiles? And depending on whether you answered yes or no, they would determine that if you said yes, you owned 1.6 of those animals. And for dogs and cats, that's pretty true. If you've got a dog, you've probably got one dog.
Yeah.
A few people have two, and very few people have more. If you've got a cat, most people have got one cat. A few people have got two, and very few people have more than two. So 1.6 animals is about right for dogs and cats. Excuse me. But if you keep reptiles, how many have you got?
You're asking me or my wife. There could be a big difference between that.
Good point, well made. But, you know, most reptile keepers have got more than one. most reptile keepers got several, and a few have got lots. So 1.6 animals per household just doesn't add up. And everybody knows that. Everybody knows that that methodology doesn't really work well for reptiles. Even PFMA, Pet Food in the UK, don't think that it works for reptiles. They know that. It's a brilliant survey. It does a great job for lots of other animals. It's just not quite the right methodology for reptiles. And so in that time, so recently, the Federation of British Herpetologists have worked with PFMA and applied their own kind of analysis to it, understanding the numbers of reptiles that people keep. And the number has come out that's far greater than the PFMA number. The number of reptiles being kept in the UK is now estimated to be around 8.8 million. Yeah, 8.8 million reptiles kept in the UK. Now, before COVID, before everybody went out during COVID and bought a dog, the number of reptiles kept in the UK was about the same number as dogs, believe it or not. It was about 8, 9 million. That's changed now. Dogs are about 13 million. But the guy who did the 75% study decided to use that very low number, knowing darn well that it wasn't accurate. So that's the first part of the story about how that number came up. The second part of the story about how that number came up was the researchers had to do those things with
Quotation marks.
Yeah. When I say that.
Loose fitting research.
Yeah. Well, they decided to estimate how many reptiles came into the UK, and that's pretty easy to do. You just count, the Heathrow and Border Force have numbers of how many reptiles fly into the UK. So they use that number. What they didn't do is count the ones that flew straight out again on a connecting flight to another country, because Heathrow is an international hub. Animals come in and they go straight out again on another flight. So they only used the numbers coming in. So, of course, that was a huge number coming in because they didn't count the ones that went out again. And it was the tiny number being kept because they didn't read the right research. So what's happened to the rest of them? Oh, them all must have died. 75%. Complete crap. Yeah? But that number gets bandied around all over the place. Now, in the meantime, we've had 2 very reliable studies being done into reptile mortality. Completely different methodologies. One study was done by a lady called Becky Clark, and she came up with a figure for year 1 mortality. Can you guess? Very different.
3%.
Just out of that. I think it was at 3.something%. Yeah. I mean, you came up with 3%, just plucked it out of the air because you know reptiles. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we estimate a very low number because we know reptiles. Okay. So Becky Clark came out with 3.something%. I think it was 3.6. Excuse me if I'm wrong. My throat, I'm sorry. 3.something%. So at about the same time, completely unbeknown to Becky Clark and completely unbeknown to DICE, the Durrell Institute, they did another very similar study with a different methodology. Their number was, I think it was 3.something% again. So we've got 2 very credible studies saying that reptile mortality is less than 4%. So we know darn well that 75% statistic is complete bunkum. Yeah. But I was in a European Parliament meeting recently when that statistic was bandied around again. 75% of pet reptiles die in the first year. It's out there, creating havoc in all kinds of studies. There was even recently a magazine issued by ABWAC, the Association of British and Irish Wild Animal Keepers. And the article that they had in there quoted that 75% again. And this is an animal keeping magazine. Yeah. And I completely understand ABWAC's position. They're a volunteer organisation. The editors are volunteer. They commission people to write articles and they expect those people to research those articles thoroughly. But we're to get in touch with ABWAC and say, hey, come on, guys, this isn't good research. These aren't good statistics. We have the evidence. And so it was really good of ABWAC to work with us to help set the record straight. And full credit to them for helping us to make that amendment. But those numbers are out there. It's our job to address that misinformation and put the record straight and to put our side of the story across. Because if we don't show up, then people just believe it. It goes unchallenged and it goes out there and it pretends to be true. That's our job, to put that record straight.
And the ones that believe it's true are the ones that go and sign the ball-free petitions and go and sign the World Animal Protection petitions online. And They probably keep cats, they probably keep dogs, but like you say, in their mind, they're thinking that, this is terrible. There's a reptile in what they deem to be a too small enclosure or anything, and that's it. That misinformation bands around, and that becomes the truth for many people.
Well, that's just one example of the misinformation that's bandied around. And if you only hear one side of the story, if you only hear that reptiles are badly kept and they don't do very well in captivity, oh, they're all going to eat your children, oh, you're going to catch salmonella, oh, they're going to become invasive. If that's all you hear, then you're like, damn, we got to do something about this. It's our job to set the record straight so that when, animal rights campaigners attack us on 3 specific fronts. The first one is welfare. They say that these animals can't be kept in captivity. They don't do well in captivity. So how come captive reptiles are routinely outliving their wild counterparts? How come captive reptiles have a far longer longevity than the ones in the wild? What is that? If they can't be kept in captivity, of course they can. We've estimated that around 85% of the reptile trade is made up of 6 species: ball pythons, corn snakes, crested geckos, bearded dragons, leopard geckos, and Mediterranean tortoises make up about 85% of the reptile trade. And those animals are routinely kept well for extended periods of time. And even the less common species that usually sold to enthusiasts, some of the species we've got here are, stuff that in the 80s and 90s, we couldn't even keep them alive.
Yeah.
Speaking to the owners of this store, they're like, oh yeah, we keep those alive now, we breed those. And it blows my mind, the amount of knowledge and expertise and pioneering herpetology that's part of, the private keepers fraternity is astounding to me. We ought to be celebrating these people instead of, giving us grief. We're so much better at keeping reptiles today. So why are we getting more grief than ever before? I believe it's because we're under attack because we've lost control of the narrative. I believe that people still think that it's 1985.
Yeah.
Anyway, welfare's the first reason we get attacked. The second one is conservation. Oh, all of these animals are snatched from the wild. Were your bright yellow ball python snatched from the wild?
They don't do too great in the wild.
No. By any measure that we have, a lot of reptiles nowadays are captive bred. If you change in their physiology, then they are by definition, captive bred are meant domesticated, are by definition domesticated. If you're changing the way they look, if you're changing their body, that's domestication. If you're making them more suitable for captivity. Most corn snakes that are captive bred nowadays don't even strike at their prey.
Yeah.
They're like, oh look, there's frozen food for me to eat. They're becoming domesticated. So the fact that they're snatched from the wild is absolute bunkum again. We know that between 80 and, I think in America it's more like 90%, if I'm correct. I spoke to Phil Goss at USARK a couple of days ago. He reckons that about 90% of USA reptiles are captive bred, and that number's growing.
Yeah.
In the UK, we reckon it's about 95%, and we reckon it's smaller than 95%. Repta did a study, and they spoke to the 2 main wholesalers to find out what proportion of their sales were captive bred compared with wild caught, and they said it was 95%. Okay, that's a good number. Then another study was done, I think it was by Chaz at Snakes and Adders, and we realised then that most stores don't get their animals from wholesalers. They get them from local captive breeders or UK and European-based captive breeders. A tiny percentage of their livestock comes from wholesalers. So that 95% figure is even smaller when you consider the wholesalers that came up with that figure make up a tiny proportion of where stores get their livestock from. So it's a tiny number of animals that are brought in from the wild. And so, no, they're not stolen from the wild anymore. So, okay, what else conservation issue do we have in our second point? Maybe they're all going to become invasive. Well, in the UK and Poland and everywhere else in Europe, no.
Very slim chance.
They're not. So do you know that Lamprey scutula king snakes were banned across the whole of Europe?
Yep.
Yeah. That's because king snakes, Californian king snakes, became invasive in Gran Canaria. Yeah. Now, Gran Canaria, as we know, is much closer to Africa than it is to Europe. So maybe that's a problem there. But king snakes ain't going to be a problem in Birmingham. King snakes aren't going to be a problem in, in Poland. So why would you ban king snakes across Europe? Yeah. Well, the answer to that is it's just political pressure. They tried 3 or 4 times, I can't remember, to get that bill through Europe.
Then crept in, weren't they, on the flora and fauna list?
Yes, it's crept in. And that's just my point. It's crept in, overreached by legislation and completely unfair. Okay, so Britain might be able to body swerve that legislation there because we're not part of Europe. But, it's still unfair legislation. So there you go, the conservation issue. And the third front that they attack us on is public health. One of the things they say is that you're all going to catch salmonella from your reptiles. And during the COVID crisis, they were all like, oh yeah, zoonoses, they're going to kill us all. You're going to, zombie apocalypse because of your crested gecko, which is ridiculous. The animal rights campaigners once set up a campaign. It was a no-win, no-feed legal representation for anybody who'd ever been to a reptile show and caught salmonella. So if you've been to a reptile show and you caught salmonella, come and see us. We'll represent you in court. We'll pay for your court battle. Do you know how many respondents they got? 0. None. Not 1. Yeah? So, yeah, everybody's dying of salmonella. Can you catch salmonella from reptiles? Yes, you can. If you don't want to catch salmonella from reptiles, wash your hands.
Yeah. Most of the shows now advertise hand sand, etc. all the time. So
you've got to be pretty lax if you catch salmonella from your reptiles.
Yeah.
It does still make me wish people wouldn't slobber kisses on their reptiles on YouTube. Maybe those guys are going to catch salmonella, but they know what they're doing. And besides, they're much more likely to catch salmonella from chicken, what's in their fridge. There was even a salmonella outbreak a few years ago that was contaminated lettuce. So even vegans aren't
safe from salmonella.
From salmonella, So if you want to attack salmonella, if you want to think salmonella is going to be a problem, let's worry about the food in your fridge rather than the animal in your vid. Just wash your hands. So no, you are going to catch zoonotic diseases from your reptile. Probably catch them from your cat, probably catch them from your dog, probably catch them from any one of a million other animals. But we get all the pressure as reptile keepers. The problem is small, and they overemphasize it to make propagandic claims about how dangerous reptiles are. The other one they talk about is that these animals are going to escape and eat your children. Yeah. Now,
you're welcome to mine.
Well, unfortunately, there's very little. In fact, there is 0 evidence to show that reptiles are a dangerous pet.
Hey guys, it's Mark from MJ's Pythons, one of the co-founders of The Ark. The Ark is now a proud sponsor of That Woolfie Royals podcast. The Ark, which stands for Amphibian and Reptile Club, is a multi-species gathering of reptile enthusiasts in the south of England. We come together multiple times a year to share our passions and have a great time together. The Ark is an event focused on diversity and community, just like the Woolfie's podcast. If you'd like to join the Ark and take part in our in-person event, head on over to the website at www.amphibianandreptileclub.co.uk and become a member today. For any other information around the Ark, please do also check out our website where we'll have past events, upcoming events, and all the information relevant to the Ark and its events posted on the website. Thank you for listening to this short advertisement and listening to this amazing podcast, and we hope to see you all at the next show.
Hi, this is Sian from Eve's Temptations Royal Pythons and Eve's Temptations Creations. I chose to sponsor That Woolfie Royals podcast because I believe the hobby needs things like this to bring us together and to showcase all the talent in the hobby, old and new. I am a hobbyist Royal Python breeder specialising in double and multi-recessive projects. Check out Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date, Morph Market for available animals, and feel free to message or catch me at a show for a chat. In early 2021, I set up Eve's Temptations Creations initially to print my own snake bags, and it grew massively from there. I print t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, key rings, glass, photo boards, and much more. This is merch printing for the breeders, by the breeders. Unlike the big companies, I will only print it if it will look good, so I can check your logo files and can alter for free, so there's no nasty surprises when your stuff arrives. I can also do gifts for the family, like photo slates, mugs, and baby grows for all occasions like Mother's Day, Father's Day, and anniversaries. Podcast listeners can ask for the podcast bundle, a t-shirt, mug, and keyring package at a discount, which can be for your own logo, podcast logo, or a mix of both. Find both pages on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Eve's Temptations Royal Pythons and Eve's Temptations Creations, and keep listening to the podcast for limited special offers throughout the year. Thanks for listening.
So that's obviously, some of the challenges that are presented and that Responsible Reptile Keeping sort of has to face on a daily basis. So how can reptile keepers support you? What can reptile keepers do to push this message even further?
It's a very interesting question because it's something that's vital. It was part of our reasoning when we were setting up Responsible Reptile Keeping. We knew that we couldn't be everywhere online. We knew that we couldn't be part of every conversation that was happening in all the deep, dark corners of the internet and everywhere else. What we knew right from the very beginning was that we needed to recruit reptile keepers around the world to share our content. We'd load the bullets in the gun and then they would need to fire them for us. And the idea is that we produce the content, we have a whole catalogue of content, and we aim to produce content about every single topic that could possibly be used against us and misinformation that's propagated. We're looking to produce content about all of those things. And it's available on our website, it's available on our YouTube, it's available on social media to share. And what we want to happen is that every time a reptile keeper sees this kind of rubbish online, sees misinformation and propaganda, they'll go, hang on a minute, here's a video to refute it. So that's important. And the reason that's important is because firstly, it lets animal rights extremists know that we're not just going to sit down and take it anymore. They better get their facts straight, because we can give them a good old spanking if they make ridiculous claims. And we need to give them a spanking as often as possible. The second reason why that's important is because when journalists come across stories like this, they go, wait, 75% of reptiles die in the first year. Oh, look. Oh, actually, no, it's rubbish. There's a video refuting it. It's not a story. Let's move on. Yeah. So it quashes propaganda and misinformation that way. But also it's important because if you share and like our content, the algorithm decides that our content is important and shares it even more broadly.
Yeah.
So sharing and liking our content is vital. The second thing that keepers can do is join us as a member. We're a membership organisation, and we're a membership organisation for two reasons. Firstly, because we need funding. This job is, it costs money to do, it's expensive, and we need as much funding as we can get. We're currently not funded sufficiently even to do what we do. So that's obviously important. But more important than that, the number of members we have gives us a bigger voice when we're sat around a table with legislators, politicians, whoever. If we can say we represent 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 people globally, we become more powerful.
Yeah.
We become more influential. And when I say members, there's a few different types of memberships. And the reason we have a few different types of memberships is we believe that, in fact, let me come back a step. So we all agree that we've got a problem with animal rights campaigning, unfairly curtailing reptile keepers and businesses. We all pretty much agree there. And we all pretty much agree that we've got a media PR problem, because the animal rights groups are much better at recruiting hearts and minds, and we need to be better at that. So that's what Responsible Reptile Keeping is doing. So we come back to the question of who should fund that endeavour. And my answer is every stakeholder. Everybody who has an interest in keeping reptiles should ideally help to fund that endeavour. I should be clear that we're never going to be rich doing this. Yeah, but it needs to be done. So we've decided that it needs to be done. The big companies, the ZoomEds, the Exoterras, the Arcadias, etc., there are many of them. Please look at our website at the the brands and businesses that support us. There's a lot of them, and we're thankful to all of them. But the big businesses pay more. They give us X amount of money every month. And then down at the other end, we've got memberships for keepers that start at about £4, $5 a month. Stores can become members for £10. I can't work out the dollars for that.
About 12.
It's about $12 a month.
Yeah.
Sorry, $12 a month.
Yeah.
Educational experiences can also become members. And the more people we have on board, of course, that means the more funding we get. But most importantly, it means that we have more power and more voices and more people behind us when we discuss these topics in law, in Parliament, and that's a very important thing.
How many members have you got to date? Do you know a rough figure?
I think it's approaching 400. That's a question you're better off asking Vicky than me.
Which, 400 sounds like a large amount of membership, but when you actually look at, say, one Instagram social media post, you get probably 2,000, 3,000 followers. Right, okay, let's say that 50% of those are actually interested in reptile keep, and that's still 1,500 people that could be and should be signing up to responsible reptile keeping if they are in a position to do so.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that fundraising and badgering people to join isn't my forte. I don't enjoy asking people for money. I'm far too British and embarrassed to be, badgering people to join us. But it is an important part of what we do for the two reasons that I've mentioned. Yes, we would dearly love for the people who like and share our content to join us as members. That would be an enormous help to us. And also very reassuring. We sit in our office thinking we're doing a great job, but it's not until we get messages and people joining and saying, hey, we love what you're doing. This is awesome stuff. Please keep doing it. We've joined as a member. We bought a T-shirt, etc., etc. That's the reassurance we get that we're on the right track. And that's enormously helpful to us. And thank you to everybody for that.
How important is it for membership to grow? How important is like the international market for it? So breaking into the US and getting people in the US involved?
Well, vital, absolutely vital. If you consider that the problems that we have and the content that we produce is all internationally relevant. The positive lists and white lists that we face here in Britain are being proposed in Europe and are creeping into America now as well. The problems that we have with reptile shows, all of the problems that we've discussed are just as relevant here as they are in America, as they are in all parts of Europe. So, the work that we do is internationally relevant. So, yes, we ideally should be funded internationally. We're UK-based, of course, so we've spent our first year building up a head of steam in the UK. We've got a lot of support. Most of our memberships are from UK-based people, and most of our funders up until last week were UK-based funders as well. But the UK is tiny compared with continental Europe and America, of course. So my trip to America last week was pretty productive, actually, very helpful indeed, I have to say. And that'll make some headway into making sure that we're adequately funded to be sustainable, because right now we're not. I've got a phone call, a video meeting with guys from US ARC in the next couple of weeks. What we're going to do is look at the issues that they're facing currently and start producing content that's relevant to those issues.
Yeah,
we'll probably use American presenter so that it's more relevant and more engaging for American audiences. I'm also meeting with some European advocacy organisations. I think it's next month in Ham.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And again, I pretty much know what they're facing in Europe, and we're just going to talk about how we can collaborate with these organisations to produce regionally specific information. Like I say, everything we do is internationally relevant. So just because we produce something in America doesn't mean to say that it won't be relevant in Britain as well. We just have to tailor it to different audiences and different relevancies to make sure that we're doing as good a job as we can do. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of things that we could do. and we need to do. We just need to be adequately funded to do it. We've spent a year developing responsible reptile keeping and testing the principle, and it's proven to be essential. We just need to source funding to do that now.
Just how difficult is it to sort of tailor that information? Because even, you look at the UK, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, you've got different rules and regulations, from Scotland to England to Wales. How difficult is it for you to put the right information out at the right time for the right people?
Difficult. We've already fallen foul of it. Let me tell you a story. So back in probably the second video we ever made was a podcast with Chris Newman from the National Centre for Reptile Welfare. It's essentially the biggest reptile rehoming centre in the world as far as we're aware. And their biggest problem is turtles. The biggest problem they've got is turtles that need a new home. But let's put those to one side for a second. The biggest snake problem they have is common boas, just normal everyday common boas. Now, we're not talking about localities here, and we're not talking about colour morphs or anything, just your bog standard everyday common garden boa constrictor. Yeah. Bearded dragons come in and bearded dragons go out in numbers. Leopard geckos come in, go out. Corn snakes come in, ball pythons come in, they go out. Boa constrictors come in, they hang around for years. Yeah. Now, boa constrictors aren't commercially bred in the UK as far as we know, at least not common boas.
Yeah.
Neither are they imported as far as we know. So we're pretty confident that these boa constrictors that hang around at NCRW are just bred by hobbyists, by keepers. And they grow up a little bit, and for some reason, and we don't know why, because boa constrictors are awesome animals to keep, they just don't get taken up by adopters. So we made a statement, or at least Chris made a statement in his podcast. He's like, look, guys, maybe don't breed your boa constrictors. Now, that statement did not travel across the pond pretty well at all. They simply don't have the same issue in the United States with excess boa constrictors. Yeah. There's a thriving market. People want boa constrictors. I wish we could export all our excess common boas over to America because they could sell. But anyway, this is one of the things that we fell foul of. That message didn't fly very well in America at all. Now, it's a good thing that we're in touch with USARC and with the businesses and the key players over there that we are now, because we can take their counsel and use their information and understand the situation there and make sure that the content we produce is just as relevant there as it is here. We're UK based. I know the UK market, industry, trade, hobby pretty well. But having access to those guys overseas makes us more sophisticated and more informed to make sure that the content that we produce is just as relevant there as it is here. And we're really encouraged by the reception that we've had from key players in different countries that they want to work with us. That's really encouraging again.
Yeah. Something you touched on, I think, in the question before, where you was talking about the association and the interaction with hobbyist keepers but businesses as well. Mm-hmm. Obviously, those groups are going to feel the pressure from those entities differently. How does responsible reptile keeping work in both spaces?
That's another interesting question, because traditionally there's been not in America. In the UK, we've always believed that the interests of keepers and the interests of the trade differ somewhat. I've not really thought that is as true as it used to be. At least that seems to be changing a lot now. I don't think that there's much of a difference. If you want to apply a responsible reptile keeping principle, traders can be responsible reptile keepers, shops and stores and importers can be responsible, and keepers can be responsible. And that's our measure. In America, they've always just had USARC. And USARC looks after trade, breeders, stores, keepers, everybody. And it doesn't seem to be particularly problematic. My measure has always been that if it's responsible by whatever measure we can apply, then that works well for us. It's never been our job to dictate how people should and shouldn't keep reptiles or run their store. We are not, could not, and would never wish to be the reptile police. We don't have the resources. We don't even have the knowledge. My reptile keeping skills are probably lacking compared with many of the people that you come here and look around this store. I probably couldn't keep half of the species here. These guys are far more knowledgeable and expert at husbandry than me. So who am I to start dictating as the reptile police? And if we did even want to be the reptile police, whose standards would we impose? Everybody's got a different idea. If you put 20 reptile keepers in a room and ask them for their opinion on husbandry, you'll get 30 opinions.
Yeah.
No, our job is to encourage people to do their best. Our job is to create a community of people who help each other. And our job, if we want to be curtailing bad actors, is to look at the clearly obvious issues that cause problems, such as releasing animals, such as, making your animal obese. These are things that we can say, hey guys, let's not do that. But if you want to know about how to keep your animals well, speak to the experts, speak to the people who run good stores. Yeah, those are the people. So yeah, we're advocates for responsible keeping. We want to set up a community of people who help each other and support each other. What we're definitely fighting against is infighting between different keeping factions. Yeah. And we're desperate to avoid being embroiled in that. We don't want to be part of an argument. We have to be Switzerland, and we have to support as much of the trade and the hobby as we can. The husbandry experts can fight it out amongst themselves politely and in a friendly fashion, but infighting within our own team just causes us harm. So please, let's look out for each other and quit the infighting, because that, I think, is one of our major problems. We'll probably destroy ourselves from within more easily than we will be destroyed by the fanatics in the animal rights front. We'll work out our minor differences, but I don't mind whether you're a trader, an importer, wholesaler, breeder, a keeper, whatever. We're here to support responsible reptile keeping.
Something you mentioned there then was standards. Now, obviously, what you said there about the infighting as such, we've always been pretty good, or up until this point, as a hobbyists or traders, industry, whatever, protecting ourselves from within, making our own laws that we hold those standards pretty high. Yes. So how do we go about continuing that rather than letting outside pressures influence what's being made?
Oh man, I love that question. That's probably key to our whole endeavour is self-regulation. And let's be clear, government love self-regulation. And the reason they love it is because not only do we show that we're responsible and capable of doing so, but also it saves them the time, effort and cost of governing us. Yeah. They don't have time to come around and check what every store's doing and every keeper's doing. So if we can regulate ourselves, all the better. Let's use scuba diving as a great example. Scuba diving's a pretty risky endeavour. If you want to go scuba diving, there is risk inherent. So why is scuba diving not regulated as harshly as it could be or should be? It's because they self-regulate. They have regulations and principles in place that negate most of the problems and most of the risk. And that's what we should be doing. And the UK trade especially has a decent track record of doing that. So if you remember back to the 80s and the 90s, when iguanas were being ranch bred or farmed and then shipped to the UK by the thousand, and then most people who just wanted a dinosaur for a pet went and bought one of these iguanas, ended up with a 3-foot psychopath that tried to eat them, probably didn't have the right lighting, probably didn't give it the right nutrition, had a really bad experience as their first reptile pet, and then went, sod this, I'll go and have some other hobby. That was to nobody's benefit, maybe to the short-term, short-sighted benefit of an iguana importer. But if you want to induct people into keeping reptiles, and especially if you want to induct them into keeping reptiles properly, maybe don't sell them an iguana. Maybe sell them a bearded dragon or a leopard gecko. And that is indeed what the trade did. I think it was the early 2000s. All the big wholesalers got together and like, yeah, maybe we don't bring in iguanas anymore. Maybe we sell bearded dragons and leopard geckos. And let's look at what happened to the reptile trade in the early 2000s. It exploded. Yeah. And this also became true of turtles, coming back to the turtle headache. So trade gets together and said, hey, red-eared sliders, yellow-bellied sliders don't make great pets because they start off size of a 50p and they're pretty cheap. You buy one, you put it in a fish tank, it grows to be the size of a dinner plate, eats all kinds of crap, needs UV light, needs an expensive filter and makes a stinky mess. And then what happens to them? They need rehoming. Yeah. So the pet trade got together and said, hey, let's not bring in trichemis, the red ears and yellow bellies anymore. Let's sell a more suitable species. Maybe let's sell, musk turtles. And that's what happened. Unfortunately, garden centres and I think it was fish importers was like, well, if you're not bringing in red ears and yellow bellies, we'll bring them in. And they continue to bring them in and they continue to be, unsuitable and they continue to be released into the wild. Yeah. At which point the European Parliament said, well, we gave you a chance. We gave you a chance to self-regulate and you haven't. Now we've banned them. So they've banned trichemis. So the importers are now gone, oh, well, we can't bring in trichemis. We'll bring in Sudanis, which is even bigger and even more likely to be a problem. And they'll be banned soon as well, I'm sure. But if we were able to just self-regulate, it would be much more effective and we wouldn't face half of the problems. And this is why REPTA is looking at things like deleterious genes. I know you're a ball python breeder, and I'm sorry to anybody who's got spiders, but maybe we shouldn't be breeding animals that have neurological issues. Yeah. We cannot defend the indefensible. We should be self-regulating in that respect. Enigma leopard geckos, is it lemon frost, silkback beardies? Maybe we shouldn't be breeding those. If there's one thing we can learn from dog breeding, is that maybe some traits shouldn't be bred. Oh my life, if we can't make that simple step to self-regulate those issues, then maybe we should be regulated. But if you're a responsible keeper, maybe you should know about that.
Yeah, that spider one's always been a contentious issue. Now, I've sort of purposefully made no attempt at breeding spider for years. It's not something I want to deal with. It's not something I want to work with. Is it a fantastic looking animal? Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, some genes out there that can't do what the spider gene can do. But if you walked into a pet shop and you saw a dog that was corkscrewing around, looking at the ceiling, and you go, "Oh, isn't that cute? Oh, something else could have that." But it doesn't. That's the one that's the problem. Yeah. Let's just wipe it out altogether. That's not saying you can't keep them and they can't be kept well. But they don't need to be bred in their mess to, what's going to happen to them eventually. Right. Someone's going to get them that isn't experienced with it, isn't prepared to put in the work and the time and the effort that it needs, and it's going to become a bigger issue.
Exactly. And the more you breed the gene, the more defined it becomes. We've been breeding ball pythons that don't constrict not ball pythons, we've been breeding corn snakes that have not been constricting their prey for years because that's a preferable trait. Yeah. And by the law of, averages and evolution, that's a desirable gene. Lovely colours and, handleable animals. Retics used to be psychos in the 80s and 90s, and now they're puppy dogs, largely. And, these are desirable traits. Maybe we should be weeding out undesirable traits. That's my thoughts on it. I know it's a more complex conversation situation than that, but if we want to be responsible, if we want to be self-regulating, and we don't want to avoid the big sledgehammer of legislation from government, we should be looking at these things.
Hi, it's Dan from World of Exotics. We're a specialist reptile shop based on the Wirral, proud to be sponsoring the Woolfie's Royals podcast. If you're ever in the area and need any of your reptile supplies, we're always fully stocked with live food, frozen food, and everything else you need for your animals. We always try to have a wide selection of different species in store with a good selection of royal pythons. We update our animal lists weekly on our website at worldofexotics.co.uk, and please check out our social media on both Facebook and Instagram at World of Exotics. Now back to the podcast.
So something that you sort of have touched on in sort of previous questions is sort of some of the challenges and the sort of legislation and the issues that we are facing. So what are the sort of the hot topics out there at the minute that people like Raptor and people like yourselves are working on behind the scenes?
Well, I should point out that it's mostly the advocacy organisations that are doing the legislative work. Our job is more output and putting information out there so that people know what the topics are and know have the information that they need. It's the US ARCs and Raptors, etc., that are doing the legwork legislatively. But if we're looking at the topics, then there are a handful. So in the USA, it's injurious species. And by injurious, they mean anything that could be invasive, which in some parts of America is a significant issue. But in other parts of America, it shouldn't be a significant issue. So large constrictors, that's a big issue.
No.
What else do we have? Positive lists, probably the biggest problem that we have to date, and I think we should cover that. We should speak a little bit about that. And more important, the UK specifically, but Europe and also increasingly America is having trouble with breeders' meetings and with reptile shows. And that's a crazy topic.
So let's run through those and we'll go through them in order. So positive lists, really not many people are aware that it was trialled in Scotland recently, wasn't it? Positive lists?
I don't know, actually. I think it was raised as a possibility, but I don't think there hasn't been a positive list imposed in Scotland, to my knowledge. We also probably explain what a positive list is. So a positive list is also often known as a white list.
Yeah.
And a white list is the opposite of a blacklist. So a blacklist is things that you can't have or things that you cannot do. Yeah. A white list is a list of things that you can have. So a blacklist is usually very short. So these are refuge reptiles as the best example. These are reptiles that are possibly a problem, so we're not going to let you have them. And that's essentially what the Dangerous Wild Animals Act is all about. Hey, crocodiles, venomous stuff, blah, blah, blah. These are animals, so they're on that list. If you want these animals, you better prove your competency. That's a blacklist. And that's preferable legislation. That's good legislation. But the white list, the positive list, has been the holy grail for animal rights campaigners for about the last decade. It amalgamates all of those other issues into one big giant end boss of a villain. Yeah. Because if you decide on a very short list of reptiles that you can keep, then apparently all of those problems go away. Got a welfare problem? Well, you haven't got a welfare problem anymore because nobody can keep them. Invasive species, not a problem because nobody keeps them. Zoonotic diseases, not a problem because nobody keeps them. A positive list solves all the problems, except it doesn't. Yeah, except it doesn't. Because a positive list is unenforceable. And we know this. Norway had an outright ban on keeping all reptiles from 1977 to 2017. And in that time, the government estimated that there were 110,000 reptiles being kept in that country illegally. And there was a thriving economic sector of stores and breeders and manufacturers supplying these illegal reptile keepers. Yeah. So we know that they're unenforceable. We know this. Sensible people pay no attention to stupid laws. Yeah, people just ignore them. So they're definitely unenforceable. They're also unnecessary because, as we've discussed, the welfare issues in reptiles are minimal compared to other animals. Are there welfare issues? Yes, there are. Should we be advancing welfare all the time? Yes, we should. But if we compare the welfare issues with dogs, cats, anything else, then we do pretty well as a taxer. I think back in, I think it was something like 2016 or something, again, forgive me if my dates are wrong, the number of dogs and the number of reptiles being kept in the UK was about the same. But the number of rescued and rehomed dogs outnumbered the number of rescued and rehomed reptiles 20 to 1. So for every single reptile that was in a rescue or rehoming centre, there were 20 dogs. Yes, that's the first thing. We know that there's 8.8 million reptiles being kept approximately in the UK today. And working out the number that's come through the National Centre for Reptile Welfare, I think it was 0.02% of reptiles be coming through the rehoming centres. So it's a tiny, tiny number, and by anybody's, it's not a problem. So what is the positive list aiming to solve? What is it going to do? What it's going to do is over-regulate and overreach its responsibility, because it's not really solving a problem. But worst of all about a positive list is that positive lists are definitely bad for welfare. We know darn well that keepers are going to keep these animals anyway. We know darn well that if you ban reptiles, ball pythons are banned in Spain. Yeah, if you got a ball python, you're supposed to register it. In Valencia, where Jose lives, guess how many people registered their ball pythons? 7.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, we know people keep them. The keeping goes underground. Those people can't go to reptile shows, can't ask experts for advice, can't get veterinary care if they keep reptiles. So are positive lists good for reptile welfare? No, they definitely are not. Yeah.
Forcing it back 40, 50 years where it does go underground, and
exactly,
it's that hidden sort of thing again.
And we lose all of this pioneering work that's been done over the last 30 odd years by people learning how to keep and breed and look after reptiles well. We lose all that pioneering spirit. We lose all that science and progression. Why would you want to stop that if you care about reptile welfare? But we know that these people don't care about welfare. They just want to stop us keeping the animals. And a positive list is the great big nuclear bomb that will stop everything from happening. So previously in the EU, in Europe, positive lists and anything to do with animal welfare was considered to be the responsibility of each specific country. So Europe couldn't pass a law about animal welfare. If Germany wanted a law about animal welfare, Germany had to pass one. Same with Italy, same with Spain. Every country had to produce their own laws. But there was so much pressure from the animal rights fraternity that now there's been an investigation, a discussion about whether there can be an EU-wide positive list developed. And we don't know who is running that investigation yet. But it opens the potential for positive lists to be imposed across the whole of Europe.
Blanket ban on.
And let's not think that just because we're in America or just because we're in Britain, we'll be exempt from that. Because you know darn well that a European law will give a green light to similar legislative pushes in Britain or in America as well. So we've got about 2 years to get on top of this topic. We've got about 2 years to influence the stakeholders and legislators to tell our side of the story. Because if the animal rights people get their way, we'll have a positive list, and then we've got a big old problem. This is probably the biggest problem we've faced in the last decade or two. I can't think of a bigger problem.
How much of the sort of influence and the pressure to adopt these white lists do you think are coming from those sort of animal rights activist groups that are pushing it?
I'd say 100%, but also there are veterinary groups involved as well. I think the BVA of British Veterinary Association, forgive me if I'm wrong, please don't sue me, BVA, if I'm wrong, but I think it was the BVA who came out in favour of positive lists. I could be wrong, or sometimes I am. But certainly there's an undercurrent of anti-keeping in the veterinary sector that is extremely worrying. And maybe that's something that we should touch on. Let's do a quick check. So if I went to a veterinary convention and asked the typical vet, where does a ball python come from? Do you think they could answer? Do you think if I asked them what kind of Ferguson zone a frill dragon needs, do you think they could answer?
No.
Do you think they could tell me what substrate a sulcata tortoise needs? Do you think they could answer? No.
Probably not.
Let's go to a reptile store and let's ask a reptile store owner those questions. Could they answer?
You hope so.
Yeah. Let's go to that same reptile store and say, my snake has this infection. What antibiotic do I need to treat it? Do you think they could answer that?
Probably.
I doubt it.
They could probably tell you from experience, perhaps, but
I think,
I'd
yeah.
probably recommend going to.
That's it. Maybe one or
vet,
two could,
yeah.
but I think most of them will say, "No, that's not what we do.
Yeah.
Go to a vet." Yeah. I honestly believe that vets should stay in their lane.
Yeah.
They're very, very good at treating sick animals, but the amount of reptile information they get in their curriculum is tiny. Unless you've got a specialist vet or a vet with a deep personal interest, then And most vets, having kept reptiles, and know nothing about husbandry. If you want to know about reptile husbandry, reptile welfare, keeping them well, ask somebody who knows about that, and that's usually a good store owner. Yeah. So I think it was 80-something% of BVA vets said they believed that reptiles were poorly cared for.
All right.
Based on what?
Yeah.
The fact that they only ever see sick animals. Yeah. Because reptiles don't go to vets for
No.
routine nail trimming and worming and stuff. Yeah. It'd be nice if they went every year, but they don't. Yeah. So what are the vets basing this opinion on? Not knowledge. We know that because most vets wouldn't know whether a reptile is well cared for or not. Yeah. So yeah, it is almost all the animal rights campaigners that are campaigning for positive lists. If you go to any of the government working groups, if you go to any of the parliamentary meetings, it's the NGOs, World Animal Protection Agency, Born Free, blah, 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 and the RSPCA quite often campaigning for Eurogroup for Animals is the big one in Europe that's run, the RSPCA is a secretariat. So all of these organisations are pushing for positive lists as their big final push. They've almost entirely focused their efforts on positive lists, and we have 2 years to get on top of it to make sure that these positive lists aren't imposed. And it should be possible for us to just point out the fact that they're bad for welfare, overreaching, unnecessary, and unenforceable. That should be enough. But we know that it's not. We know that we need to win the ideological hearts and minds of people who will be campaigning against us out of naivety or malice.
Yeah. No, I think that's summed it up pretty well, to be fair.
Civil servants want to do a good job. People in government want to do a good job there. They're probably not interested in reptiles. They ask us and they ask the other side, and they come to a sensible consensus when they have good, sensible information to use. But pressure is exerted by people who think they know get their opinions from social media and propaganda that animal rights people broadcast. And we need to counter that quite strongly so that we don't get swept up in a Spanish style problem where instead of solving a little problem, they throw the baby out with the bathwater and we're all banned from keeping reptiles. Sounds extreme, but it's not. It could happen. In Spain, the whole CITES office has been replaced with newly graduated environmental studies students who have reinterpreted Spanish CITES law and raided several collections throughout Spain that were previously considered reputable and responsible and working within the guidelines. But now those guidelines have been reinterpreted with a new perspective from an animal rights perspective. They've been and raided several collections. I know a parrot keeper, elderly parrot keeper, was thrown to the ground and his disabled wife also handcuffed. All of their parrots were confiscated, distributed around different other collections and organisations, and most of them died. A friend of mine had nearly £500,000 worth of animals confiscated for literally no reason whatsoever, and he's unlikely to see those animals again. And even though he's going through the courts, the end result is likely to be, oh, sorry, yeah, never mind.
That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
The problem that we have is that if organisations such as USARK and REPTA and Responsible Reptile Keeping are successful, everybody would say, well, there's no problem. That's, what are we supporting these organisations for? There's no problem. So that's the problem. If we're not successful and all these problems occur, they're like, hey, you guys are supposed to be dealing with this problem. Where are you? And then we look bad.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place.
We are stuck between a rock and a hard place. But positive list is definitely something we need to get on top of. And I don't want to be scaremongering people, but you need to be informed, and we need to be fighting against this before it becomes a real problem, and it does have the potential to become a serious problem.
So the other point that was sort of mentioned there as well was breeders' meetings. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be a reptile podcast if you didn't bring up the breeders' meetings, especially from a Royal Python breeders' point. So obviously, you've seen the IHS and Doncaster getting moved, etc., blah, blah, blah. That's seen an influx of these smaller shows being put on by people to promote the hobby, showcase what we're doing, etc.
Yeah.
Where do they fit in with the legislation that's currently there? And where's the grey areas? How does that work? And is there anything being done to change that situation?
Yeah, there is. It'll be an interesting few years, but let's start back in history again. So many years ago, and again, my dates will be wrong, but I'll tell the story anyway. I think it was back in the 50s, there were markets in London, I think it was Petticoat Lane, where you could buy pretty much anything. You could buy big cats, you could buy primates, you could buy reptiles, you could buy parrots and birds of prey, etc., all piled high in cages in the street in the rain in London. It was awful, terrible, shouldn't be allowed. So a law was passed that says you cannot sell animals from a market stall. And that stopped those awful markets in Petticoat Lane and stopped those poor animals being sold in really terrible conditions. Now let's fast forward to around about the late 80s and early 90s. And we used to have a really good reptile show in Walsall at Alan Wells School. He was just around the corner from where I was apprenticing as a reptile keeper. And that show got closed down using that law because what it was perceived they were doing was selling animals from a market stall. And if you squint your eyes, that could be seen to be true. Yeah. But that's not what was going on. These weren't animals out in the cold being sold in poor conditions. These were enthusiasts and professionals and people who knew their stuff about animals, selling animals that they cared for, that they bred. Yeah. So it's a very, very different situation altogether. And the law was used disingenuously. It was misappropriated and used to shut down reptile shows. Yeah. We got round it by saying that the shows were breeders' meetings, that the people who exhibited there weren't professionals, weren't companies, and that these were excess breeding stock, which is essentially true. These were enthusiasts, these were hobbyists, these were people who were breeding animals and wanted to sell their offspring, or at least the offspring that they didn't want. But by law, we couldn't be businesses. So if you were a reptile store, if you were a wholesaler or whatever, you weren't allowed to be at the breeders' meetings because you were selling, because you were a commercial entity. And what the animal rights people have tried to do over the years is define what commercial is. And if you had something like a business card, a banner, a website, a business name, then you could be somehow deemed to be commercial. Whether you were making any money at it or not is a different matter. I tried to be a reptile breeder in the 90s and make money from it, and I failed. Like most other people, it's not easy to make a business from reptiles. Most people do it for the love, and most people don't make any money from it. So anyway, commercial breeders, or what was perceived to be commercial breeders, were prevented from exhibiting at these shows, which is craziness to me, because the people that you want at these shows are the professionals, are the experts, the people who have the knowledge and wherewithal to do it as a living. Those are the people that you want at the shows, so that they can pass on their knowledge and advise people and show how things are done well. So when we went to America and saw how the Tinley show was running and all the other shows were running, they looked fabulous. The people there were allowed to demonstrate their expertise and demonstrate their passion. Look We want to be accountable. If you buy reptiles from us, you know who we are. There's my business card. There's my business. There's my website. We're accountable. We're showing how passionate we are and how we want to do things properly. And you can't do that in the UK. And that to me is absolute madness.
You want those people to be held at the highest of regard as well, you know, in terms of husbandry and how they're setting up and how they're showcasing, etc.
The reptile show situation in the UK has been a terrible, can I say shit show?
Can indeed.
I'm sorry. It's been a shit show for the last 10, 20 years. And that's of no fault of the organisers. They've had their endeavours curtailed by the animal rights propaganda and misappropriation of the laws. They should have been allowed to do things on a professional basis and to be showing the best side of keeping. And I'm hopeful that if we can get this sorted out, then reptile shows in the UK will flourish.
So under current legislation guidelines, those breeders' meetings at the moment are legal, illegal, grey area, who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's it is grey area, and it will depend upon the local authority and how they interpret the law. There is nothing stopping us setting up a little club for coffee drinkers and putting together a whole load of people who enjoy drinking coffee and discussing the different types of coffee that we like. And maybe you like my coffee, so you buy a bit of my coffee. Yeah. Indeed, if you're a pigeon fancier, pigeon shows happen and they're massive.
Yeah.
And they don't get any grief whatsoever. And they're exactly the same as a reptile show. It's just that reptiles are the low-hanging fruit that animal rights campaigners think are easy prey.
Yeah.
It's easy to convince the general public and the uninformed legislators that there's a problem because they're not cats, they're not dogs, they're not pigeons, they're not hamsters that people might have had experience with previously. It's becoming more mainstream. But, you know, we're low-hanging fruit. But rest assured, if they manage to curtail reptile keeping, you'll be next. Whatever you keep will be next.
Yeah, where does the line get drawn? You know, what?
Parrots will be next, and then it will be, you know,
Birds,
hamsters, guinea pigs, birds of all types. It doesn't stop with us.
Andrea Lupodini is one of the leading names for graphic designs and logos within the reptile industry. He produces high quality designs for some of the most recognisable names and faces within the hobby and the industry, and he has also designed my logos too. Branding and marketing are so important these days, and making sure you stand out from the madding crowd is difficult, or it was up until now. If you're looking for a new logo, or perhaps you just want to revamp your existing design, then look no further. Andrea will work closely with you to bring your ideas to life, and he can do so in a variety of different styles also. As well as logos, Andrea also designs eye-catching roller banners, social media banners and YouTube banners, to name but a few, and these will all give your pages a fantastic professional feel and edge. For a full range of products and services available, check out Andrea Lupodini Design on Instagram and Facebook, but please be sure to look out for that blue verification tick. This series, we're excited to bring you a unique podcast bundle to really up your game. Purchase a full logo design and receive 2 additional services free of charge. This could be a Facebook cover design, a table banner, a roller banner, stickers, t-shirts. There's nearly 20 extra services and products to choose from, so you can tailor the package to suit your exact needs. And the greatest thing about it is you'll even save yourself over €100 too. So, use the promo code Woolfie24 when inquiring with Andrea to activate your podcast pack savings today. Be sure to follow Andrea's social media pages for further fantastic offers and check out all of his existing deals too. Thanks for listening. Now back to the podcast.
Hi, this is Darren from Wildracks. We've decided to sponsor that Woolfie Royals podcast for the 2nd year running, as he done so well last year. So if you're in the market for a custom made rack in any colour you want, with any coloured tubs you want. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Back to the podcast.
I think I've taken up enough of your time, so we're going to start wrapping up. So what I need you to do for me is put out where people can find you. So social media, website, how can people support the cause, and where's best to contact you, etc.
That's easy. So we're everywhere. And the reason we're everywhere is because different people like to consume different types of content in different places. So it's no good as just putting all our stuff on our website. It just turned into a dusty old website that nobody ever visits. All of our stuff is on the website, so you can find us at www.responsiblereptilekeeping.org. Everything's there. But how we realised as communicators, we knew that it was ridiculous asking people who enjoy a 2-hour podcast to read a magazine. So we don't just produce one podcast, we produce a magazine as well. But it's ridiculous asking people to read a magazine if they just want a 2-minute video, or maybe they want a 45-minute documentary like we've done. So we produce lots of different types of content so that everybody gets to consume the type of content that they want. So you'll find all of those different types of content on our website. You'll also find us on YouTube. You'll also find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, not so much, but we do have a presence on TikTok. And also you can subscribe to our Substack. If you just type Responsible Reptile Keeping into Google, you'll come up with one of those platforms and we shall be there. You can contact us through our website. We have a contact form on the website, and Vicky's really good at responding to that. So that's something you can do. If you're a keeper, or if you're a breeder or a shop or educational experience, you can join us as a member, and we'd really, really dearly like you to do that. It helps us with funding, but it also helps us with membership numbers and to show how much support that we have. So you can join us. The cheapest membership is about £4 a month, which is less than a cup of coffee sometimes. And it really, really does help us. We're currently very underfunded, so if you can join us, that would be awesome. But the best thing you can do for us, it's free, it's cheap and easy, and that is just share and like our stuff. As I was mentioning earlier, it's difficult to judge how successful we are, because if we're very successful, there ain't a problem. And if we're absolutely awful, then there's a massive problem. It's difficult to judge how successful we are. So the people who fund us, the big organizations and companies who fund us, the best measure they can get of how effective we are is how much our stuff gets shared and viewed online. If our stuff is all over the internet, is all over everywhere that our funders and our enemies and our animal rights people and legislators look, if our stuff is front and center in your face everywhere, we're doing a good job, because we are a media organization. Our stuff needs to be in front of as many people as you can. So if you share it, it gets in front of all those people. But even better, if you shared it and liked it, the social media algorithms consider that content to be important and share it even more broadly, organically. So sharing our stuff is probably the best thing you can do. And joining us, we'll love you forever.
So one other thing to mention on top of that as well, if you want to see people struggle, I'm part of a small group of people that are doing a very stupid thing in May. So we are embarking on a little mountaineering adventure, I'm going to call it. I'm going to make it sound probably bigger than it is. So there's a group of us doing the Three Peaks Challenge in Wales. So if you're not familiar with it, it's Snowdon, Pennyfan, and I can't remember the other one. 3 mountain ranges in 3 days. All proceeds from that are going to charity. They're going to Responsible Reptile Keeping, and they're going to National Centre for Reptile Welfare as well. So 2 very good causes that work pretty much hand in hand as well.
Absolutely.
And have done for years. I've had Chris on the podcast way back in season 1, so 3 years ago now.
Cool.
And it's 15 minutes from my house as well.
Oh,
that's fantastic.
Great stuff.
So yeah, if you do want to donate, check out social media pages. People keep sharing links, sharing pages to donate as well. It's all on GoFundMe, and you can find it. So there is a really there is a modest target of £1,000 that's been set. I am confident that we will absolutely obliterate that, and I'm pretty sure we're close to that 1,000 already. So if you can donate, every little helps. But like Tony said, even if you can't donate, just keep sharing and raising awareness for it, and that will help spread the message as well.
We've been so impressed with the support we've had from you guys and the ball python breeding community. They've been awesome, and we're really, I can't say we're looking forward to seeing you suffer, but
you're still coming along with us, right?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. The mic's gone funny. Is that? Can you fix that? I didn't quite catch that bit.
Tony said if it gets to, was it 2,500? You said you'll join us.
Well, I'd have to join you on one of the decks. I think I'm in Norway when you.
That's a long trek.
It's a long walk from Norway. I promise. If you get to 2,500, I will do the route myself on another day.
There we go. So make sure you donate, because we want to see Tony suffer just as much.
Wearing Speedos.
Don't donate. Well, I think that about sort of wraps things up for us. So again, big thank you for coming on. I know I've taken up quite a lot of your time here. It's been fantastic. Big thank you to the guys at C&T Exotics. If you just grab that t-shirt, Tony, we'll hold it up and give them a bit of free advertising.
These guys have been awesome, and we've managed to film in some of the best reptile stores in the UK, and this one certainly counts amongst them. So thank you very much. Check out their social media and come down and have a look. You'll have a really nice time in here. It's a lovely store. So thank you.
Absolutely. Guys. Yeah, big thanks around, and that's about it for me. So anything else you want to add before we close it off?
No, just thanks for having me on, and
pleasure.
I look forward to seeing you after Wales.
It's going to be a pretty sight.
We'll see. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, mate.
Take care.